Kotze. Professor Kotze, thank you so much for joining us and a very good evening. Professor, today has been a very, very interesting day. President Zuma has responded to the recall by the ANC National Executive Committee. Take us through your thoughts on what exactly, after watching his interview and discussion with our reporter Zwandile Mbeje, just take us through the thought process and what went through your mind when you heard what he had to say as the president of the country after his own party recalled him.
Well, I think there are a number of issues that arose from this. The first one is that President Zuma denied that he has done anything during his term as president that could have been a cause for being recalled by the ANC's National Executive Committee. He also felt that in that sense the ANC and the NEC specifically could not give him any specific reasons for this recall, which means that he wanted to have a one-on-one discussion with those in the NEC who represented them and wanted to argue with him or explain to him why the recall took place. At the same time, I think what is also significant is that President Zuma indicated that he is willing to continue with negotiations. That he therefore does not interpret the current situation as if the negotiations have come to an end, that the Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa has not made any progress to the point where they could reach an agreement on these matters that were discussed. And then I think what he is also has been very explicit about to say that though the ANC took the decision about recall and therefore that there was obviously a clear majority that supported it, that he is not at all willing to tender his resignation as compared to President Mbeki in 2008, who was clearly also upset about the decision of a recall by the NEC, but still followed or complied with the decision of the NEC and did resign quite soon after the election. So there are also very clear contrasts between the approach of President Zuma on the one hand and that of President Mbeki about 10 years ago. I think what we have seen is that President Zuma is saying, no, I'm not going to resign very soon, and it is for the ANC now to take it further. The ANC already indicated that they want to take it now to Parliament for a motion of no confidence, in which any form of negotiation with President Zuma or any other reconsideration of the process is not anymore possible.
Now, Prof, do you think we're likely to see, President Zuma did mention the fact that he was going to make a statement sometime tonight. Are we likely to see a scenario where he does resign, or should we be looking towards a motion of no confidence taking place tomorrow? What do you think the two different scenarios, and just speak on the positives and negatives of both scenarios for the president currently as we speak?
Well, I think with respect to resignation still tonight, it is very unlikely. Even a statement by President Zuma appears to be very unlikely. I was a few minutes ago still at the Union Building, and it is exceptionally quiet there. There's no indication that there's any activity there in preparation for such a statement or a statement of resignation. So in that sense, I think what President Zuma is most likely to do is to use an approach of brinkmanship almost to see to what extent there is the possibility that there is still some response from the ANC side. I think he also is testing the ground whether there is some, maybe a type of a backlash from supporters of him to try to criticize or to protest against the decision of the recall. So I think the main approach, therefore, of President Zuma is to go as close as possible to the motion of confidence tomorrow before he will take his final decision whether he will resign or whether he will submit it to the motion of no confidence. I think the motion of no confidence is going to be detrimental for him because he will be the first president since 1994 who will be removed by a motion of no confidence. it will be even more detrimental for his reputation and legacy, which is already problematic at this stage. But if he followed the pattern of President Mbeki, and to some extent even of President Mugabe last year in Zimbabwe, and resign before the parliamentary process commences, then he might still be able to gain some respect. If one looks, for example, at President Mbeki today, he's a well-respected elder statesman, though he was very much criticized at the time of his resignation in 2008. If it goes to a motion of no confidence, I think it will be in the end and over a period of time much more difficult for President Zuma, even if he's not charged at all in future, to be able to gain the same type of respect as President Mbeki did.
Now, Prof, is there any legal recourse that President Jacob Zuma can take in the future with regards to his being, if there's a motion of no confidence, or if he doesn't resign tonight or before the motion of no confidence is implemented or instituted? Is there any legal recourse that he can take and come back and say, no, actually, I was forced out, I didn't want to leave? Can you just speak to that?
I'm not an expert lawyer, but as a person who follows this quite closely, I can't see that there's any legal recourse for President Zuma at this point in time. To start with, the decision about his recall by the ANC's National Executive Committee, that was not a legal procedure. It wasn't something like a disciplinary hearing. It was not something like a court procedure. It was a political decision. And in order to be able to challenge such a political decision, I think most courts will refrain from becoming involved in that. You know, we have seen very much recently our courts are very sensitive about the idea of judicial overreach. So I cannot see that the recall aspect of it will be challenged. The motion of no confidence, if the procedures are followed with the motion of no confidence, the parliamentary procedures are followed, then it will be also exceptionally difficult for President Zuma to challenge the outcome of a motion of no confidence. So I cannot see at this stage, and the way in which it is being approached by the ANC and the opposition parties, the way in which the Speaker consulted, convened the committees in Parliament in order to deal with the preparation for the motion of no confidence, that there will be grounds ultimately, especially procedural grounds, for challenge or for, in court by President Zuma. So I think ultimately we will have to accept what is the outcome.
Now, Prof, earlier on today, after President Jacob Zuma's interview with our reporter or correspondent, Mzwandile Mbeche, there were reports of ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa as the Deputy President of a country meeting with President Zuma at his house in Pretoria. Do we have any idea, or do you have any information as to how that meeting went and what was discussed on the table?
No, unfortunately, I don't have any indication of what was discussed there. But clearly, there hasn't been a concrete outcome in terms of the procedure that President Zuma will follow. There's clearly Deputy President Ramaphosa did not succeed to convince him to resign up to now. Because I think for the ANC itself, it's a much better option for President Zuma to resign than for them to go through the parliamentary procedure of a motion of no confidence. There's all sorts of complications that can develop, especially political complications. While if President Zuma resigns on his own accord, then it will be a much easier and a much more straightforward process. So, but what was the outcome of that? I don't know. But I think the one point which should be clear is that, and President Zuma indicated it in his interview, that he's willing to restart negotiations with the ANC. And I think that is not possible. So it should not be interpreted as if Cyril Ramaphosa started again with the negotiation process to try to strike a deal with President Zuma. That period of negotiations has come to an end when the National Executive Committee was convened in order to take the decision about the recall.
Prof, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That was Professor Dirk Kotze, and he is a political analyst, and he joined us via Skype from Pretoria. Former opposition leader and president of the MD